This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
We'll move on now to Jan Marsh, who's going to speak to us about reframing the nation. Jan is an art historian. She curated the amazing, brilliant exhibition a few years ago, Black Victorians, Black People in British Art, that was on in Manchester, wasn't it? And she works at the National Portrait Gallery and is currently researching Ira Aldridge and Paul Robeson. So looking forward to hearing her paper.
Well, I should just say that Jeff comes up with the most amazing research every time. There can't be anybody who knows more, has found out more about people of colour in the 19th and the early 20th century than Jeff. And he's always astonishing us with new information. So thank you for those three fascinating pieces. Now, see if I can do this. Yeah, is that sound all right here? If I stand up? No. This one? Yeah. Really, that's only behind the lecture, but never mind. Museums and galleries, this happened a bit about the pictures, they've got a bit horizontal, never mind. Are among the forces that formulate national heritage and actually our collective sense of our history. And in visual terms, they shape the image of the past. And I'm just wondering, I need continuing to investigate some ways in which British museums responded to the absence of black history in their collections and their programmes. And I'm looking back a decade to when I started work on Black Victorians, which was actually before the 2007 commemorations, and so before most museums and heritage sites have become aware of black history to any great degree. And I started my research into 19th century visual representations myself, aware of only a few. But those few had been enough to prompt me to ask, why so few representations, given the key impact of empire on Britain in that century, and the extent of the traffic between Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, the Pacific, and Europe. So that was a bit of a puzzle. My research focused on high culture, so I wasn't doing like archival research or newspaper research like others, but this is the arts of painting and sculpture. To try and map, as it were, the black presence and thus really the black absence. And I didn't initially project an exhibition. I wasn't really expecting to find enough objects. And several times I was told, you won't find what isn't there, and it's not there for a reason. It's been excluded. It's the subjects, these people are ignored and excluded from high art. And you have to remember that online research was actually quite rudimentary then. Sorry about that, just a bit. I searched museum catalogues, exhibition catalogues, back to about 1800 for titles more than images. Anything with slave, Negro, Uncle Tom. And I travelled throughout Britain, plus the east coast of the US, looking for artworks in all sorts of places, some unexpected places. And so left to right here, that is Arthur Wharton, who's in the Preston Football Museum, the daughter of Eve, the sculpture that's in a mansion in Northumberland, built by Lord Armstrong, the arms manufacturer. Top right, Louis Black, a resident of Montrose, eastern Scotland. Lower left, John Mongo, artist model, Edinburgh, National Gallery of Scotland. Centre bottom, the model boat builder on the Sussex coast in the Brighton Museum. You can't quite see it, but he's an ex-sailor, carving and selling model boats. And then far right, sculpture of Caprese Colonie, which is actually in the Wellesley College, Massachusetts, and it's only here because it was a very popular image. And many of these works were, of course, in store rather than on display. Now, some museums were already investigating their collections. Caroline Bressie at the National Portrait Gallery was a pioneer in this field to see what was there. And when Tate Britain, as it is now, mounted a small exhibition called Picturing Blackness in 1995, I confess to being disappointed because there was a mere 4 works, really, from that vast Tate collection of British art, or British and modern art. But that was actually representative of museums then. It was that standard sort of situation. And the investigation process suddenly accelerated with central government funding for 2007 events. Funds were actually dependent on displays marking the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade, and at the same time on extending participation to the black communities, as it was, BME audiences as they're known in the trade. And because BME audiences are woefully underrepresented in the museum among heritage visitors generally. And that was a challenge for some parts of the heritage sector who sincerely felt that they had nothing to appeal to the community, and it would be patronising to invent or pretend that they had, you know. And in the book about it, Roshi Naidu notes widespread anxiety within the curatorial profession, and that was certainly true, I think. But there was a widespread general response to this initiative, and it was not overwhelming, but in many ways it was inventive, in the shape of museum trails, as at the V&A, or the Special Commission at the British Museum, displays at the National Maritime Museum and the Museum of London, and how far these displays, how far these initiatives persuaded the community that they had a stake in the heritage industry, I don't know, but it was intended to appeal to them. I do know that the 2 museums I worked with on Black Victorians were utterly delighted by the response from the community, as if they felt the appetite was there among people who may never have visited these museums before, and who suddenly saw an exhibition that was was part of their heritage, was responding to it. And another museum told me that whenever a blackface features on an exhibition poster, then visitor numbers rise. It's the song. But I have to say that in other respects, the heritage sector remains dominantly by whites, for whites, with some signal exceptions. There's the Black Cultural Archives, as you know now. There's the Ineva in East London. There's the Equiano Centre, of course, and the Spaces of Black Modernism, which came out of the Equiano Centre and had a long run at the otherwise white Tate Britain. And there's Rich Mix, and there are other venues that I'm not very aware of. But I would say that the main national museums remain curatorially white. And this is of concern, I think. Okay, the question, sorry, here's the Black Cultural Archives that opened last summer, I think. Now, it's a question how Black historians wish to research and present the inclusion of Black history in national museums. I'm not sure that question is actually asked of Black historians or in general. And secondly, how far they would prefer to use dedicated spaces like Black Cultural Archives or the International Slavery Museum, or how how far they wish to present black history in other heritage locations, i.e. As it were, undedicated, in general interest. The National Portrait Gallery, given its inherited preponderance of white male sitters from British history, you can just imagine what an overwhelming white presence is in both the galleries in display and in the stores there. But it has actively pursued a policy of extending diversity through both contemporary and period acquisitions. Now, acquisitions are a trickier task in respect of past centuries, when portraiture was largely restricted to the rich and powerful men and their wives or their heiresses, whatever. But when the opportunity arises, it is pursued, as with the remarkable discovery of Mary Seacole's portrait, a very small object, as you see from the curator who's holding it up at the top. It's actually a very small portrait, but it is absolutely invaluable to the Victorian narrative of British history, standing for so much that isn't there, isn't visible. Other major acquisitions have been Suleiman Diallo, bottom left, and another version of the Ira Aldridge as Othello portrait. Now the former, the Diallo portrait, has been used nationally in a dedicated tour mounted by the NPG around the country. So it has been seen in various locations beyond London. And both are quite unexpected finds, acquisitions, and valuable additions to the national story. And you may have seen them on Simon Sharma's recent TV series, The Face of Britain. I think he used both of these. And it's a sign of changed times, because when the Diallo portrait came up at auction, the National Portrait Gallery was hopelessly outbid at auction by an overseas museum. So, there was an export stock put on it, so it actually remains the property of the overseas museum, and it's on loan to Britain for a limited period, and it can't actually exactly leave Britain permanently. But it's a sign of the new desirability of such images. And similarly, the owners of the Aldridge's portrait had second thoughts. They put it up for auction, and when people began to be interested, they thought, oh, well, perhaps we should hold on to it. So it's similarly on loan for the time being. And I think this shows that black portrait value has risen significantly over the last few years. Now, I'm talking chiefly about national museums, so there's a lot more to say about other museums, but I'll just briefly keep to this subject, I think. And Tate has also sought to diversify, as it were, and add to its holdings that it showed in 1995, and also finding other things, acquiring and displaying works that reflect a newly diverse history. They had the acquisition of this fine pastel by Ozias Humphrey, who's only known as Baron Nagel's footman as yet, but obviously he was a known character and Baron Nagel was a Dutch diplomat in London, and so he was obviously a known character around town. And Nagel was famous for dressing his servantry in fancy costumes, so this is why he looked so splendid. And that was shown at the Royal Academy in 1795, so that suggests that he was recognised by the quality, as it were, because it was only the fashionable who went to the Royal Academy. And the Tate also pulled from its store the Victorian image in the centre of a captive woman and her children, which is actually now on display at Millbank, and for more than a century it's been in store and no one really knew it was there. So it's interesting that they pulled it out of store. And I actually rejected it for Black Victorians because it's very, very dark and was almost illegible. So I really didn't want to display something so black. As it were, so black in most senses. Now, but what you can't really see from the slide, and it's very difficult even if you go to Tate and look at this, is that the woman, as well as the naked toddler at her feet, she has a tiny babe under her cape. You can just see a bit of his body under there. I don't know what it's meant, except that it's called the slave, but I don't know what it's meant to represent exactly. Needs some more work. And then just recently, Tate has found this forgotten Victorian study of a man in Indian costume. It's an orphan work. That is, no one knows who it's by or who he is. And it was purchased in 1942, and it's still without an attribution. So any suggestions as to it's like his identity and the identity of the artist, or where this image might fit into art history or history, would be very welcome. It's one of my sort of side projects to actually investigate. And one can cite other examples of museums striving to fill gaps and recast history. A process that also takes place in loan exhibitions, of course, not just in national collections. And on the left, this portrait of the Moroccan ambassador, which has been known for a long time but very seldom seen, but actually has been recently shown twice, including a wide-ranging exhibition on Elizabethan London at the British Museum a couple of years ago, which included, interestingly, a section on Africans in Shakespeare's London. And that inclusion in an exhibition on Elizabethan London was surely prompted by research by some people in the audience here, who've been investigating people of the community of black of colour in Tudor and Elizabethan and Stuart Britain. And that would not have happened, I think, without this kind of research, Miranda included. And stretching definitions a little, there's the unidentified sitter in the portrait on the right by Jan Mostert in Amsterdam. So that he's still awaiting a proper identification, but he's been found. And we should note too the recent rehang at the Guildhall Art Gallery in the City of London. And that's one of the most traditional art museums in the capital. Can't tell you. It has pulled out of store. As you can see in the installation shots, the bottom right figure is that represented in the isolated detail of the top right. The woman carrying a bowl of exotic fruit. And that's really interesting that Guildhall has brought that to add to the public display after it's been in the store since it was acquired, I think. So there was at least one black face from the past to accompany the lone exhibition No Colour Bar, featuring the life and work of Erica and Jessica Huntley was on Guildhall. Also on display recently was the Icon Gallery in Birmingham, was the life and work, and indeed the whole home of the photographer Vannie Burke. And it seems to me, it was a brilliant installation in the Icon Gallery. And it seemed to me that we are actually seeing in this installation national history as it happens. Because it's not something from the past, it's something that is very present and has been built up over the past few decades by Vannie Burke. And that raises the question, how important is this issue of work by black artists in national collections? Never mind, work that may or may not depict black subjects. Their presence as authors of art is highly relevant to black history and to museum presentations, it seems to me. But at the same time, neither these artists nor their museum backers may wish to foreground an ancestral identity, or rather that, their particular ancestral identity. Are we talking British artists here? And should such people of colour, just be included as British artists, which in general, in contemporary art, I think they are now. You may disagree with me, but I think that so many of the younger generation of artists happen to be black and have been and are extremely central to British art at the moment. The Tate and the National Gallery have commissioned works by Chris O'Philly, and those two on the left. And although fairly well known, the painter Lorena Himi, she as yet lacks O'Philly's high profile, but she's an artist who actively engages with museum collections. And quoting from her statement, her aim is to creatively interrogate the history and representation of the African diaspora and the role of museums in cultural history. So I feel that her work deserves more attention than it is currently getting, although that's not to say it's getting none, it's getting quite a lot, but it hasn't actually reached general consciousness next. Historians are doing, as I said, impressive work to recover the black presence in the UK from the Roman times onwards. And one suspects that when such evidence surfaces, it's often embraced by museums, which remain very conscious of their multicultural heritage or of the demands for heritage demands. Of course, as regard objects and artworks, there are real limitations. Evidence in the shape of items and images may simply not exist. They may be lost, maybe never existed. Generations do pass without leaving tangible, identifiable remains. However, that which is lost shows that the research shows that that which is lost shall be found. Some of it anyway, if only one looks for it. And I think we can have a lot of reason to support that statement. I was told you won't find what isn't there, and it isn't there because it's been deliberately suppressed. So, but when I found twice, three many times as many black Victorians in art that could be accommodated in an exhibition, I did learn to question the assertion that it doesn't exist. And I also learned that funding produces results, and you witness the harvest of stuff, of museum objects and trails created for the 2007 commemoration. So I think also demand produces results. If the demand is there, it's asked for, if it's sustained. And so I would just say that this is our national history, and the whole community deserves to have that recognised. Thank you.